Hey guys, Abel Ramos with Compass here today with Virginia Fuentes of Channel Islands Law Group, estate planning attorney here in Santa Barbara. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're an estate planning attorney, how long you've been doing it, and what makes you unique compared to everyone else that does estate planning in Santa Barbara.
Well, I am a native of Los Angeles, right? California native, but born and raised in Los Angeles, came out here to go to UCSB and did not want to leave. It's too beautiful
It
out
always
here.
seems to be the case, right?
Yes.
No one ever leaves.
And luckily my path was allowed me to stay here. So, UCSB, wanted to go to law school, went to the local law school out here, cute little nonprofit, which I teach at now. And, had an HR background, and that kind of brought me into, the employment law world and a little bit of the business world when I graduated. But I'll talk a little about graduating. When I graduated, it was at a time during the recession when there were really no jobs for other attorneys out there.
It was a tough time.
It was bad. And so, and then the only few that were out there were litigation. And I know I don't want to argue with anyone all day, as that's not my thing. I am a problem solver. I like to support people. And so I knew that wasn't my path. So I opened up my own firm right out of law school.
Nice.
Yeah. That's
brave.
It was a lot. Yeah. A lot to figure out. Law school, most schools don't teach you how to run a business.
Right.
And so that was something I had to figure out. And it went well. And so, I was figuring it out. And one of the biggest things that I really wanted in that firm was doing something a little different. I didn't like the idea of litigating, let alone helping someone for a period of time and them disappearing. I didn't like that. And I didn't like the transactional thinking of you come in, I create something for you, you disappear, and I never hear from you again. And so right from the beginning, I was like, I want to do this a little differently. And I can reflect now that it was my HR background where I got to really get to know managers and employees and really kind of being that go-to person. And that was always my goal. Estate planning came into my life when I discovered a mentor and a mentoring program that really focuses on doing things a little differently. It was exactly what I was trying to do, but fumbling through when I opened my firm initially. And so it was a great program. It was fantastic. And now I've modeled everything I do after what I learned from them.
Nice.
Right. Some of the key things I do differently is I do flat rate. I don't like to do hourly billables. I want you to know, everyone to know exactly how much it's going to be, and you're okay with it. And
I'm sure that provides a lot of clarity too,
Yeah.
right? It's like just knowing, I know it's like how much, if someone says it's $500 an hour, right off the bat, I'm like, oh my gosh, how many hours is this going to be? So flat rate, definitely, I can see that's really important.
Flat rate, I try to do flat rate for everything. Even if something's a little nuanced, I'm like, okay, let me see how much time it is. I want it to be a flat rate. The goal being, you're not hesitant to pick up the phone and call me and ask me questions. Right?
It's important.
It's not going to be billed,
It's
right?
important.
I don't want to bill for those anyways. So that was one of the big ones that I've implemented. I'm trying to just do things a little bit differently so everyone can feel comfortable with communicating with me. The other one is, I like I said, I don't want my clients to disappear. So I've built into my estate planning process a follow-up program, right?
I like that.
A lot of the times when estate plans fail, it's because it's been years since it's been drafted and life changed.
Right.
Therefore, it's not going to do what you want it to do anymore. So I build in a follow-up automatically every 3 years for my clients, where I will drag my clients into my office, review the plan, and make sure it's still going to do what they want.
Is that every 3 years, like for life, or is that just a one time?
As long as they're still my client, as long as you respond to my requests to come in, right?
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, I'm still going to keep, you keep coming in, I'm still going to bother you. And, and then we make any adjustments if we need to.
And I would think adjustments are important, right? Especially revisiting that plan if life changes. Maybe someone's married or has kids or buys another property or owns a couple investments, 5-6 years down the road.
Correct. The big things, getting married or divorced. That's always going to be a major change. Having children when you didn't expect and it's not built in automatically in the plan. having young minor children, and then as they grow, they're now adults. You want to adjust your plan then.
Okay.
Moving, if you move out of state or into California, it's always a big one. And your assets, your earnings, you're going to grow, right, in income. And so I want to look at it every once in a while and go, okay, where are you at? And is there any kind of thing we need to do?
I would think, so right off the bat, jumping right into it, you've kind of already touched on a few reasons why estate planning is important, but I had a question. The first question I had, which we've covered now, is like, when do you revisit that plan? So you kind of answered that. There's so many different life changes that I think maybe people aren't thinking about when you should go and change your plan, right? You probably just think it's one and done, but reality is it's not.
No. And it's not even just that. Like, even if your life doesn't change, there's certain documents that you need to refresh every once in a while for, so your advanced healthcare directive, you need to refresh that every, I would say about 5 years, just so it can be acknowledged by the institution, hospital, wherever you're at. Power of attorneys are a big one too. Like your bank isn't going to accept it if it's really old either.
Okay.
And so you need to come in, at least refresh those, but revisit again the language. Maybe you changed your mind. Maybe someone you listed in there passed away. You want to revisit and look it over.
So just a few things that you've mentioned. Someone listening to this may be, my age, which is just about 40 years old, and maybe thinking like, why do I need a power of attorney, or why do I need this advanced care, document? Right? Yeah. Why is that so important? And when do you see people needing to actually put those things in play?
Okay, so I say it's never too early.
Okay.
To do your estate plan. You turn 18, you're an adult, you should do one, because there's benefits around the documents that are created in that estate plan in varying situations. And so let's talk about the documents that are normally the basics. And so you're going to have a will, you're going to have potentially a trust, but you should also have that power of attorney and that advanced healthcare directive, right? And so those 4 documents interplay together to cover situations of incapacity, meaning you're in the hospital, you can't make decisions for yourself, and you can't handle your finances, right? And that usually, when you're young, you might not have a whole lot of assets, but that can be a big issue for a lot of people. The law will default to your parents.
Even if you're over 18 years old. Okay, interesting. I didn't know. Okay.
And even then, there's some stuff to do. So if you don't agree with your parents, you have a relationship, maybe it's a fine, but you just don't agree around certain types of things like treatment, being experimental with stuff, you might want to, think about who then you would be more comfortable with making those medical decisions for you. One of my colleagues was talking about a friend of hers that got in young, not a whole lot of assets, but got into an accident and didn't create their directive. And mom came in to take care of her and make the medical decisions. She wasn't happy because mom made decisions that she did not want to happen.
Interesting.
Right? Certain types of treatments. She was a bit more experimental. She would have been happy with, trying different things. And now she was struggling on how she can now be determined fully capacitated, fully recovered, so that she can remove her mom as her agent.
Wow. So it's not, so funny. Like, I just learned something new. It's not just when someone passes away, does this estate actually become that something you use, or it's important. It's literally, it's like as simple as incapacitation and having an accident. Wow. You don't even think about that kind of stuff, because it can happen to all of us.
Yes. And so that's why I say it doesn't matter what age you're at. And in those advanced healthcare directives, you can also put a lot more language in there about how you want your treatment, have a little bit more control directly on that document, right? That clearly communicates your desires as far as treatment goes.
Okay.
So, doesn't matter what age, doesn't matter how much you have. It's really, really useful.
As soon as you're 18, an adult, start working on your estate.
Yeah.
And then working with you every 3 years, they can come back and reevaluate that plan.
Yeah.
And make changes to the plan. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
And so your life's going to change, right? You might be young, there's a period of time you probably don't have much, right? First, I want to say, okay, so let's talk about probate.
Yeah.
This is that threshold about as far as value and assets. Probate is the default process in the states, right? This is the court process codified in statute that says if someone passes and they don't have anything set up, this is how their assets are going to be distributed.
Okay.
It's a court process. You have to hire an attorney to go to court. And go through that process because the judge's signature is essentially the replacement of the person who's passed signature, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Person who's passed can't sign anything. Right. And so this is how you legitimately will be able to transfer all of the assets if you don't have anything. Well, if you have, mixed families, you have other stuff, you'll want to avoid probate, but we can talk about that later. Yeah. So in order to, there's a threshold about how your value of assets to go through a full probate. That's about $160,000. It's not that much money.
Bank accounts, automobiles, real estate, that's everything?
Everything, okay. Right? If you have assets higher than that value, you are going through a full probate. Okay. And probate is, it costs money as well. Not only are you paying an attorney, you're paying court fees, you're paying assessor's fees for people to assess all of the property. Yeah. You're paying for a lot of other expenses, right? So it's expensive. I say an average around 5% of the value of an estate, but it can vary because the attorney's income is statute percentage wise, right? And the fees and all of that stuff, again, based on how many assets are getting valued and things like that. Okay. And so it can be less, it can be more. And it can be way more if there's an argument, right? Because you're stuck in court arguing over who gets what.
Who gets what, right? And there's no will, so no one knows anything.
No one knows.
Okay, got it.
Right. So if someone has assets that has reached anywhere close to that, I build for growth. So I am not only just checking in with them in the next 3 years, but I'm like, okay, how much are you going to grow in the next 5 to 10 years? Are you in a big growth spurt? Because I want to create something that we don't have to redraft every 3 years. Right. That's not my, I don't want to.
It's not trying to create extra work, right?
Right. Extra work or take a bunch of money again.
Right.
I just, I'm like, okay, what are we doing? How are you growing? And so if you're anywhere close to that, I'm like, okay, let's really talk about your options now. It's not just as simple as incapacity anymore. Okay. Right. So, that comes into play as far as value of assets on whether or not I advise doing will or trust. And I will say, a lot of people don't realize this, even if you have a will, it goes through probate.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So what avoids probate then?
Trusts.
We're talking about it. Having a trust.
Having a trust.
So a trust isn't, there's lots of different entities that someone could, hold title to a property to, but a trust will avoid probate. Would you say that's the biggest advantage of having a trust?
Yes.
Okay.
Especially for our clients that, so there's a threshold of tax, and not a lot of clients have concerns about inheritance tax, right? The biggest benefit for them is avoiding probate, is avoiding that expense, that time. Probate is a minimum of a year.
Okay.
Right.
So that could
in
be
California.
In California, a year of legal fees, attorney fees. Right. Yeah. Very expensive.
So avoiding that and making it easier, because probate is not an easy process. So making it a whole lot easier for your family to handle these assets and to distribute them. You have to get a judge to approve everything you do in probate versus, okay, now we can handle this. Let's see what we want to do. And you're a little bit more flexible when you have a trust, right?
And who helps you carry, just because we're talking about it. So let's say someone has a trust and that person passes away. Who helps you? Who steps in and helps you in that moment?
Well, you name your trustees.
Okay.
And the goal is you've named someone you think who can, be responsible and handle this. They have a lot of responsibility. But nothing says they can't come to an attorney and talk, and that's what's considered trust administration, right? Okay. And I highly advise getting an attorney because there are some rights, that you have to abide by, or rules you have to abide by in order to do everything correctly.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that you have to have an attorney. right? It can be done
by a family member,
friend.
Okay. Someone that you trust.
And I advise that too, especially with minors and, families with minors. Your family is going to know better, or friends or people that are close to you are going to know better about how you wanted things handled.
Right.
And so I really like it to have at least them involved in the trust administration, stuff like that.
Nice. All right. Well, we kind of covered a lot already, right? Just talking back and forth. But one thing that I've learned is that the most important thing with the trust is to avoid probate, which is interesting because I would have thought it was more tax perspective, but now I'm learning, which is the whole reason why you're here. So kind of touching a little bit on a question I want to cover, and you can just give me a quick answer. We don't have to go too far in depth, is the inheritance tax. Does anyone that passed away have to pay inheritance tax, or is that once you're worth a certain net worth? Right. How much money do you have to be worth to pay inheritance tax?
So inheritance tax comes into play. I like to call it you get a coupon. Everyone gets a coupon of being able to pass down a certain amount of money to your children, your family, without paying that tax.
Okay.
And so right now, 2023, it is about $12 million.
Okay.
Right. And that's for an individual. If you're married, you've doubled the amount of money.
And that's all assets, real estate, bank accounts, retirement accounts, stock account. Okay.
Right. Well, all the assets that are going to pass. Now, if you are beyond that threshold or anywhere close to that threshold, there are advanced ways to make our planning so that we can keep things or create trusts and other additions in a way that helps keep that number down. So there's no tax being.
Got it. And that's where your approach, it's not one size fits all. It's a very tailored individual approach.
Yes.
Making that plan for that specific person in their estate.
Right. And for me, it's that getting to know that client really well. I spend a good amount of time with them. And it's not just the money, it's what are your goals, right? Yeah. What are your desires? What do you want to happen? And then also what's going on in your life right now? And I what's the drama? I always like to tell me the drama because we want to plan around that.
Right.
And that tells me what kind of plan you really need, and I can customize it the best way.
Okay. I like that. So one thing that I want to just kind of circle back to, because I love your energy. I love everything about, I thought talking about estate planning was going to be a little dull, but I can tell you right now, I'm already like smiling and having fun and learning things, which is great. What made you want to do? I know you said you had this mentor in HR. I want to get back to that. You were out of HR, you're an estate planning attorney now. Like, what is it that you find passion in doing that today? Like, is it still the same from when you first decided to be an estate planning attorney?
I'm actually really loving it. It's the relationships that I get to have. The difference is, like I said, I don't let my clients necessarily just automatically disappear. I don't want that to happen. My goal, and luckily right now, it's true, all of my clients I consider friends. Okay. Like, I get to know them. I get to know what's going on in their life.
I feel like that's pretty different from most estate planning attorneys. I can say that, right? Seems different.
I spend a bit more time than most attorneys do with my clients. I'm very, I don't want to say thorough, but I want to really know everything. And I also teach, like I said. So my approach is also making sure that everything's understood. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
And if there is any concerns or questions, everything, all the options, pros and cons are understood so that the client can make the best decision for themselves. Right. And so time, and spending time with my clients and try to create something really custom is what makes me a little bit different.
Really getting to know them.
Yeah.
I like that. And you seem very personable too, which is great. I'm sure talking about estate planning can be intimidating, or at least I would think it'd be intimidating. You're really sharing a lot of information with somebody. And maybe, my only experience from it was I had help my mom get a trust, right? And it was like one of those things, someone had passed away, and it was like, maybe we should think about doing this. Is that typically what you find when someone thinks about creating a trust? Like, is that...
It's a mix.
It's a mix. Okay.
Yeah, it's a mix. And so there are a lot of people out there that will... especially right now, we have what is called the sandwich generation, right? They're trying to deal with mom and dad that are in the, beyond retirement. They're in retirement, further into retirement, maybe having some medical issues. Okay. And they're seeing the difficulty of not having these documents created.
Is it harder to create those documents when they're of that age?
Once someone's incapacitated, once someone's considered not able to make, decisions for themselves, it's really hard to, you have to go to court again to get the ability to make medical decisions for them and be ability to handle their money. So it's just more hassle, more money, hiring an attorney again to kind of get the same ability to be an agent versus, just paying me to do the documents before.
Yeah. It's interesting because being that a young person, like I mentioned earlier, it's like, I would never think that now is the time. And I'm sure a lot of people are in that same boat, but let's talk about for someone that maybe isn't in that boat, someone that's a little more sophisticated and owns, let's say 6-7 properties. Do you ever find like they even make mistakes by not having them in trust, or
have you not heard celebrities about their wills and not having anything in place and everything going through it? Now I'm trying to remember Prince, right? Did Prince have a will or not? There's so many stories out there.
So it's common.
It's common. Even people with lots of money don't necessarily create these documents. And then everyone comes out and says, I should have some of this money, right? So then you have these long court arguments, that are just dragged on, and it's just taking money out of the whole estate.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I wonder what, like, to teach people that are listening or watching this, like, what do you teach them? Like, how do you teach them the importance of this? Like, why? We already talked about why it's important, but how do we get them to know they need to start now? Like, how do you get that across to people? That's kind of interesting to me.
It's hard. One of the things I try to do is my consultations are free, right? So I don't want a barrier there. So come to my meeting, give me a little information about you and your family. During that meeting is where I spend a good chunk of time getting to know you and getting to know what you want. During that time, I'm focused on you.
Okay.
And so I talk about what would happen right now if you didn't have anything and something were to happen to you, right? And so it's a little bit more, right?
Yeah, it gets a little more emotional,
right?
For sure. Right?
Very much reality. What would happen if you passed away when you left my office? Right. And so that usually kind of gets them a bit more motivated because we're talking about, okay, what would your family have to do in order to, inherit a home? Right? What would your family have to do, especially if you have minor children, to make sure they get custody? Right.
I have a question about that, just since you talked about inheriting a home. Like, from the probate perspective, if someone's spouse passed away or something and they weren't on title and that home was going to have to go to probate, can they stay in that home still, living in that home, or how does that work? Just out of curiosity.
There's you start probate, someone has to come forward to be what's called the executor, basically the person that's doing probate, the responsible person. And so they will kind of take title as the executor, as that person. And so it's kind of, dependent on the situation. If someone in the home is damaging the home, bringing value of the home down, your executor has a responsibility to kick them out.
Got it.
Right? They have a responsibility to keep the assets in full value and not, mess anything up. So they, but if there isn't an issue, right, you can stay.
You can stay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the family still gets to use the home and live there until that's all sorted out.
Right. Well, and there's always concerns if there's a mortgage. That gets a little bit more complicated about how are we going to handle the mortgage company. The mortgage company is going to lock things down. So if there's a probate, you have to tell banks, agents, all of these people that someone has passed.
Okay.
Right? Even if there's a trust.
They're making the payment and all that stuff. Okay.
Even if they're doing that, you have to tell them. And usually what that does is that locks it down, right? They're not going to do anything anymore until a court order comes in.
Until the court order comes through. Okay.
And so that's also a big negative for families who, maybe their bank account or some account is only in one spouse's name and that is the primary account everything's getting paid out of. That account's going to be locked down and you're not going to have access to the money.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, wow. Yeah. I didn't know that. Wow. Which is going to lead me to a question right off the bat, because that's an interesting thing is, in your experience, what have been some of the most more complicated situations from someone not having a trust that you've experienced? Tell us more about that.
So there's a lot of stories I have in my head. So there's that one with the incapacity. I've had a friend of mine is still going through probate for her aunt's property.
Oh, wow.
It's been 7 years now.
7 years.
Why? Because she did actually have a trust, but it was so old, the people listed in the trust had already passed away.
Another reason why you have to visit you with every 3 years to update this stuff.
You got to update stuff. You got to change. Yeah. And so that one's an interesting one. I had one client. So one of the things about having a home go through probate is that the court's interested in selling the property quickly.
Okay.
Not interested in giving you the full value or the best value.
Maximizing value. Okay.
Not at all.
Interesting.
And so, and it's an auction process. It's kind of, convoluted and complicated. I've had a client who had a home go through that. And again, several years now, trying to get this all cleared up and close probate because most of the assets were in that home.
Wow.
Yeah. And therefore he had to get a loan in order to pay probate fees.
Wow.
In waiting for his inheritance to come in.
Wow. I wonder if sometimes, maybe not in Santa Barbara, but in other states, I'm sure maybe the value of these houses could end up not being worth as much when you consider how much fees you would incur over 7 years of legal fees and court fees,
Well, arguments, all of that stuff, it can get really, really crazy. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you answering that. I have another question for you just because we did talk about incapacitation here during retirement. What legal tools, I have it written down, what legal tools can be put in place to manage properties and finances according to someone's wishes? So we've talked about 2 documents. Which were the 2 again?
The incapacity, so the power of attorney. That's a financial power of attorney, and essentially a medical power of attorney, which in California is called advanced healthcare directive.
And these are all forms you do when you create a trust.
I do all of them.
You do all of them.
And so for incapacity, the trust also comes into play.
Okay.
And so the goal is the trust owns most of the assets that you have, right? Think of a trust like a business. You're creating a little bit of a separate entity, and that owns your property.
Got it.
However,
you don't own the property, the entity owns the property.
You do when you don't, right? The entity owns the property. This is how we can avoid probate, right? Because your trustee can just step in to manage that, and we don't need to worry about your signature if you pass away, right? Your trustee can be the signer. With the IRS and tax-wise, it's still seen as you.
Okay.
Right?
Got it.
And so that can come into play for things that can be owned by a trust. There are certain assets that cannot be owned by a trust.
Like?
Retirement.
Oh.
Your retirement accounts have to be an individual.
Okay. So what happens there? So what happens if someone passes away? That goes to probate then?
Not necessarily. So you get to pick your beneficiaries, right? Beneficiary designations.
Pick those.
Right. And so you have to, you want to create the trust first and then list the trust as a potential beneficiary.
That often as well, I would presume, right?
Once you have it set up, you're good, because if you're updating your trust, fine, and it's always going to filter to your trust eventually, you're good.
Okay.
Right.
So you don't have to go in and call these retirement accounts and update beneficiaries every so often?
No.
Okay.
Not necessarily. But, one of the things, again, that I do that's a little differently is funding is very important to me. And funding is the process of putting things into the trust, changing beneficiary designations. A trust is, just a pile of junk if nothing is owned or going to the trust at some point in time.
Okay.
Right? And so for it to work, you have to do those beneficiary designations. You have to change ownership. You have to do all of these things in order for it to actually be effective.
So what if someone already has a trust in place and let's say they haven't had it reviewed in a while? Should they still contact you to set that up if maybe they haven't talked to their attorney in a while and they like what you're saying here? Like, should they contact you and say, hey, can you look this over for me? Is that something you do? Or
Yeah.
like, no, I didn't create it, so I'm not looking.
No, I do. I do reviews. And so I'm more than happy to review a trust. If your trust is, I want to say 5 or more years old, there's probably some best practices that have changed as well.
Okay.
Taxes and the way retirement accounts are now treated as far as inheritance and trusts have changed. And so there's a little bit of a different way in which to treat those. And so I always like to look at that. There's special language I put in my trust just for those type of assets.
Okay. So someone listening, if they have a trust already, does not mean that this isn't applicable to you.
Yeah.
Just come, set up the consultation. You'll look it over, help them out.
Right.
if it can be helped.
Yeah.
And maybe it's perfect, then cool. But if not, you can help them.
Correct. Right. Like especially if it's an older trust. Yeah.
5 years or older, you said?
Definitely.
Like nice. Okay. I wanted to revisit this word funding you brought up, because I don't know what that means in your industry. In mine, it means, getting close to getting paid and funding the deal. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
It's the process after signing the trust. So you need to have the trust created. You want to create the trust. And then for me, I hold on to you for a little bit to make sure that the funding happens. Funding is moving things either into the trust as ownership. I usually do the first one. I'm moving your deed. If you isn't already into a trust, I am creating the deed. I'm getting it signed to transfer into the trust. Okay. And there's a couple of other documents moving your random, assets, your home stuff and things like that.
Bank accounts?
The bank accounts, though, usually they don't want to talk to anyone but the owner of the account. So usually I'm working with my clients. Okay. I create a spreadsheet of the assets that they've given, that we've talked about, right? The goal is all of the assets. And I use that as a checklist. Have you talked to this bank on this account, right? Were you able to transfer ownership of that account to the trust? That's the preferred method, is the accounts are owned by the trust. Sometimes that doesn't work out. There are alternative ways, but that is the goal. If it's owned by the trust, again, your manager as the trustee can just step in your shoes and utilize that money as needed. There's no locking it down for probate, right? Okay. So it's those accounts, making sure beneficiary designations are properly done in your, not just retirement, but life insurance if you have it, right?
Okay.
And then any other random things. So if you own a business, we're talking about transferring ownership of either the interest of an LLC or the stocks of a corp into the trust. Wow. Right. All of that so that, again, these things don't have to go through probate. A business going through probate is crazy.
Wow.
Don't ever do that to your family.
About the business. So that's something new that I just learned today. Right.
Yeah. Right. Don't do that to your family. If you own a business, get some planning done, because it's just crazy. And so that's the funding process. And so I'm going going down this checklist, making sure it happens. That's always my goal before you are kind of done with me for the year. Okay.
So it's like a three-phase process: consultation, creating the plan, and then funding the plan. Funding
right.
The trust, right?
Mm-hmm. Funding. And I don't like to let you leave unless at least you're done with most of that funding. Right. And we're just waiting.
The most important part.
Yes, most important part. Most attorneys don't necessarily worry. They just tell you what to do and they let you go.
See you later. Yeah, I think that's what happened to my mom, because then she was calling me, asking me, what do we do? And I'm like, I think they said this.
Right.
And I started
trying to figure it out. Yeah. And I keep you because also I want to be your support, right? That's you get some document, you're like, I have no idea what to fill this out, what to do. And I'm like, okay, let's talk. Let's review it. We'll fill it out together. We'll send it in. So, that is a big chunk of my time with my clients.
And I definitely can feel like that you are going to take care of me. That's exactly the feeling I'm getting across, just as you've talked about why you're doing this, how you help people, holding on to them, reviewing the plan. Like, I definitely am feeling the love. Like, that's for sure. So I wanted to bring up, just kind of wrapping this up here. If you could leave the audience with one thing not to do. Maybe they're thinking about creating their trust on their own or something. Like, what's the one thing they shouldn't do?
Okay. Don't do an online system. Don't do any kind of automated system where you don't talk to someone. Everyone's life and situation is different. Okay. And so cookie cutter plans are not my thing, and I hate them. Yeah. Because there's going to be something in that plan that is not what you want. Right. So, I'm a big one about making sure it's exactly how you want it to happen, how you want it to work. And so those are always horrible. They might have things in there that you never wanted to happen, things in there that, you don't even care about. Wow. And might not be flexible. One of the things I really love to do with my plans is we know who you are now. We know your life now, but we're not going to know what your life is when you need this plan to come into play. Right. So I build things with flexibility on purpose, so that whoever you've named as your agents can do what they need to do for you.
So
and they're not, don't do a cookie cutter. They're going to restrict their ability. Yeah.
Got it. It's not a one size fits all approach.
No.
Yeah. I think that's one thing everyone's learned from listening to this. It's definitely a custom plan, right? Well, I thank you so much for being here. I've loved having you. I've learned so much. I would love to have you back again. We could talk a little bit more, maybe about probate next time, or maybe touch on a little bit of taxes and estate planning and how that works. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm Abel Ramos with Compass, and we have Virginia Fuentes with us. Where can they reach you? Can you tell us a little bit more? How do they contact you if they want to check you out online?
A little bit of a long name. And
we'll
so,
put it up on the screen.
yeah. So it's channelislandslawgroup.com is the website. You should be able to book appointment right on that website. If you want to call, our number is 805-652-6941. And you can just call. I'm extension 101. You can get a hold of me immediately, but any one of my colleagues can help you out as well.
Nice. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad we made this happen, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.